the world with my own two hands. Make a better place with my own two hands. Make a kinder place. Oh, with my own two hands. With my own two hands.
Hi. Wow. What an amazing day. I'm fired up to be here. I'm happy that you're here and we can be together. So to start off, we're going to look at Scripture, John chapter 9. I think that's a good place to start. Read about a pretty interesting character named Jesus. Love him. Love that guy. And, like literally, I do. So that works. Jesus is awesome. We're going to study him this morning. John chapter 9, starting in verse 1. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. His disciples get a pretty smart idea. They say, "Rabbi," his disciples asked him, "why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins?" Interesting question for them to ask. What I'm going to ask you to do this morning is, usually, we're going through this series on discipleship. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to not view where you're supposed to be or view this story through the eyes of the disciples. Sometimes, because we're disciples, we look at the disciples and say, okay, let's pattern ourselves after what they're doing. This is not one of those times, all right? What I'm going to ask us to do is to change our perspective a little bit and to look through the eyes of the blind man. To view this story and its power through the eyes of the man sitting probably lonely by himself in a crowd of people, probably pushed away by his family, neglected, and with really having honed his sense of listening, is listening to everything going on, is hoping that someone might give him something, maybe with something there to say, to implicate that I want you or need you to give something to me in this place that was probably very busy. But having no sight, wondering if someone would help him. What I'd like us to do is make our perspective and put our perspective like we are that person. And maybe we hear that there's this man named Jesus who is coming into the area. And our heart gets a little bit tense. We're trying not to get too excited because we've heard of stories like this in the past before. But he's never come to this area. And you've heard how Jesus has healed the sick. You've heard how he's even healed the person who can't walk. And you're wondering, will today be that day? And yet you still feel as lonely as ever. Because for years and years you've sat there. And maybe you're even a little bit hardened because no one will do anything to help. And then you hear Jesus. And you hear that he's coming, and you hear that he's on the way. And so your senses kind of perk up, and you hear the commotion as he walks through. And then you hear his disciples. And you listen as they wonder, "Rabbi, what is wrong with this man? Why was he born this way? Was it because of his sins? Of the things he's done? I mean, after all, we're healthy men. We can walk and see and work with you. I mean, we have it going on. We're your disciples. We're your followers. Now we'd like to know, Rabbi, what is wrong with this man?" And with that, your ears shut down. Because this group of people is just like everybody else who's ever walked by you, made comments, made fun, ignored. They are no different. And I wonder how many times in our lives as we look at this story and we understand that some of us have claimed to be followers of Christ and have stepped out there. I wonder how many times apathy has taken hold of our lives. And when we could have done something, instead we did nothing. When we could have reached out, instead I got busy. It happens to me. It happens to you. It happens to all of us. But the disciple of Jesus nonetheless, is called to something more. The disciple of Jesus is called to step out. In fact, we're going through this series on discipleship. What we've said is discipleship is making Jesus your everything and becoming a living version of him. Unfortunately, many times, instead of doing that, we become apathetic. But we're called to be empathetic, to share in the feelings of those who are suffering. To what extent we can, to understand and to share in the feelings, to what they are going through. Not just the cool kids, the hurting. Not just the rich people, the poor. Empathy. To begin to put yourself in that person's position. To look into those person's eyes and to feel what they're going through. Just as an example of the way I feel sometimes about this and fail miserably in this. This year, I was talking to a few people last week in my life group about my own problems with this. In a situation where last football season, right? I'm a Steelers fan. Just going to throw that out there. It is what it is. Okay, cool. One of us likes that. And it just so happens that they went to the Super Bowl. And they lost. Please, no cheers. And I remember afterwards, getting in the car, we were at a Super Bowl party, had an awesome time, a great time, up until the end, the final 0.000 seconds. And I'm sitting there with Carrie, and I'm wondering, what did I just spend my time on? My 106 hours of watching football in the 2010-2011 season. If you wonder how much that is, if you're an average sleeper, which most of us are not, if you're an average sleeper, that took 2 weeks of your sleep. Every minute of your sleep, if you're an average sleeper. If you're an average awaker, that took exactly 1 week of every breath you took awake. That's how much time I spent watching football that season. And I remember sitting there after they lost, and I remember thinking to myself, what have I wasted my time on when I could have been doing something? Now, this is just me. I'm not declaring martial law here, or saying what you should do, right? I'm thinking what I was thinking during that point. What have I spent my time on? Apathy versus empathy. When life becomes more about our amusement than about our passion that God has given us, there is something wrong. Now, thankfully, Jesus steps in and answers the question. He says, verse 3, it was not because of his sins or his parents' sins. In other words, allow me to enlighten you the reality of the situation here, guys. Jesus answered, this happened so the power of God could be seen in him. Teaching point. We must quickly carry out the tasks assigned to us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world. Translation, you have been given a task as a follower of me. And I'm about to show you what some of these tasks entail and what you are supposed to do. So the reason why this person is like he is, ultimately, is for the glory of God. And I'm about to show you how you should respond in this situation. This is a big problem for us as disciples. I mean, this seriously is a problem. And let me tell you why. Because that means that God has a task for you and I. A task that is different than just sitting around and doing nothing. A task that should move us, first of all, to see a problem, and second of all, to go out and fix it. The problem is, we have a problem seeing the problems. We shut our eyes to what's going on around us. I am more than anyone else. It just is what it is. And that really stinks. God has given each one of us what Bill Hybels, the pastor in Chicago, calls a holy discontent. What we've defined this morning, a holy discontent, as being is a passion to see what is wrong and to make it right. People are counting on you and I to grab on to the holy discontent, to move beyond where we're at, to move beyond what is, and to make what is supposed to be. People are counting on us to do that. Let me ask you this question. If we really care about people, let's kind of process and get to the heart of the matter. Are people important? Is it right that this person is without heat? Okay, let me ask you this. Is it right that this person is lonely? Is it right or wrong that this young child is without clean water? And if there is water to be had, must walk 3 to 5 miles to get it? Is it right for this young lady to say to God, God, I have all the food and family and money I want. My life is good. I'm in my little world. I like it. I don't need you. And we look at those things. I wonder if we see the needs and say, that is not right. As disciples, do we say, are we given a passion to say there's something that can be changed and we must make it right? So Jesus, then he spit on the ground. That's attractive. He made mud with the saliva and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. Now think about this. This blind man, that you put yourself in the position, he's been lonely all his life. Just think about, he's heard that Jesus heals people. His heart is probably pounding. And Jesus puts the mud over his eyes. And Jesus told him, go, wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Now I love this, because Siloam means sent. The man is then sent. Not to stay in the same position. I want you to go. I want you to actively go, and you're going to be changed. Here it goes. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. Isn't that beautiful? There was a problem. Jesus steps up. Jesus doesn't allow the disciples to sit there and to talk about their philosophies and what's going on and what you got to do and blah, blah, blah. He says, there's a problem. We step up and fix it. God has given us a task. This is what we do. So then mass hysteria kind of goes off. And his neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, and others said, no, he just looks like that guy. So they're having this conversation, thinking in some way, is this a guy? And the blind guy is like, yeah, I can see now. I can be a part of the conversation. You've ignored me for a long time. Now we're hanging out together, and I'm here, and things are fixed. He says, yes, I'm the same one. They asked, who healed you? What happened? He told them, the man they called Jesus made mud and spread it over my eyes and told me, go to the pool of Siloam. By the way, that means sent, he must have said. And wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. For most of my life, I could not see. For most of my life, I was blinded. Same is true for you and I at times. There are times in our lives where we sit blinded by our own comfort, blinded by our own apathy. And God instills in us, or has for us, a holy discontent, and yet we do nothing. The series ends on discipleship with these last 2 weeks called Mission. That you and I, as followers of Christ, do not have a duty to just hang out together. Do not have a duty to just play us four and no more. The series ends with mission. That we have a call on our lives to do a task, to do something. So people didn't know what to make of it. So they take the blind man and they're like, what should we do with him? Let's take him to the Pharisees. They're the spiritual gurus. They're the teachers. They know what's going on. So they take him to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees say to that man, what happened? And he said, and I'm sure he loved it, he said, here's what happened. Same thing you just said. Jesus came by with his disciples, and they were talking junk. Okay, he didn't say that. That must have been the Greek term. But Jesus interacted with me. He takes mud. He puts it over my eyes. He tells me to go wash. I go wash, and I can see. The Pharisees didn't like this, clearly, but because they didn't like Jesus. So they start thinking of ideas of what was wrong. But the blind man says, no, I can see. Do you understand? I couldn't see before. And here's the thing about vision in our lives, is that when we get a vision, when we get a holy discontent, you better bet it is God-induced. That God wants to work in your life to change something that's gone wrong. That God, when he created the world, he said it is good. And something went wrong in the process. It probably had to do with sin in a large, like everyone sins kind of thing. And in some way, things got messed up. And Jesus says, and you can bet that if you have a passion, it is God-induced. It is focused on the fact that God has worked in your heart to move. The Pharisees trying to make up excuses, said, do you know that it's a Sabbath? And he worked on the Sabbath. You see, the notion at this time was on the Sabbath, nobody was to do any work. And so they found the fault there. They found the problem there. And they said to the blind man, they said, what do you think of this man, Jesus, the sinner? And he said, he's a prophet. He's a prophet. So the Pharisees didn't like where they was going. So they stopped. They basically reasoned with themselves, you know what? This guy probably wasn't blind in the first place. It's probably not the guy. It's probably the different guy. So they go all the way to it. They get his parents, and they bring his parents back. His parents realize this is a setup, and there's something very wrong here. So they say to his parents, Mom, Dad, is this your son, and what happened to him? How can he see? The parents say, listen, this is definitely our son, and we have no idea how he can see. They press him a little bit more. They say, listen, he's of age, he's old enough, ask him. The Pharisees are getting a little worked up. They're getting a little mad. So they go back to the blind man. They say, listen, give God the glory here. This man's a sinner. What do you think happened? The blind man says, listen, I don't know if he's a sinner or not. This is what I know. I was blind, and now I can see. Check it. The other thing I know about God-induced vision is that it's clear and it's simple. That God is not a confusing God. He's not asking us to do like all these things that confuse each other and that conflict. And God is not a simple God, but God asks us to do a clear and simple thing. And this guy says, here's the deal. This is it. This is what I want to share with you. I was blind, and now I see. Fellowship Church, we have a vision. Here's the vision. Everyone needs a family. Everyone gets treated like family, period. That's not always easy to do. Sometimes we fail on that. That's a problem. But here's the thing. When everyone gets treated like family, when everyone gets treated like they're important, whether we meet them for the first time, whether they're outside of these walls or not, they have a better understanding of who God is and what God is all about. Because we are God's disciples. We are Jesus' hands and feet on this earth. So we don't just treat people like they're a possession. We don't treat people like we're manipulating them. We love them. We treat them like they're our family. That's the vision. That's what we want to see happen. That's what we want to see take place. That's where we want to move toward. And he says, I was blind, but now I see. That's what I know. So the Pharisees go, because the Pharisees are very perceptive. They said, okay, what happened? The man says, listen, I've told you already. I've told everyone I could tell. Do you want to be one of his disciples too? Oh, they were not happy about this. This was very upsetting to them. So they just kind of freak out. And they kind of like kick dirt at him and get all mad. And they're like, you're a sinner. He's a sinner. You're all sinners. It's kind of like the mature way to handle it. and they just start judging him. He goes, listen, you told me yourself in your own teachings, when growing up, I learned that you said God doesn't listen to sinners. Then how come I can see? And they kick him out of the temple area, where he probably lost his family, where he probably lost any hope of reconnection that he could have had with others as a seeing person. The thing about a God-induced vision that is clear and simple is that it will cost you. Why many of us won't do it. It's why many of us won't take a step of holy discontentment to see what is wrong and to make it right. Because it will cost us too much. It'll cost us status. It'll cost us money. It'll cost us family and friends. And so we will be content with being churchgoers or being casual toward Christ instead of his disciples. So Jesus comes to the man after he heard that he was kicked out, alienated. And he says, do you believe in the Son of Man? This was a Hebrew way of saying, do you believe in the Messiah? And the man says, show me. where the disciple is, or where the Messiah is. Show me where the Son of Man is. Show me where he is, so that I may believe in him. Jesus says, you are speaking to him. You have been speaking to him. And the blind man, the one who at the beginning of the story was lonely, the one who for years was hurting, more pain than you and I can even imagine, gets down on his face and says, Lord, I believe. I believe. Here's why it's so important to see things through the perspective of the blind man. Because as we continue to see things through the perspective of the disciple, you know what happens? We kind of hang out with the other disciples. Not a bad thing. That's community. That's awesome. But then the more and more you do it, you become a club member. But when you see things through the eyes of the blind man, when you see things through the eyes of the poor and the downtrodden, what begins to happen is you understand and realize and remember that you were a person who was healed by Jesus. You were a person without vision, who was going through some things, who was hurt, who was walking through life aimlessly, and Jesus came and changed your heart and touched your life. You, at one point, were that person. And a disciple is not a club member. A disciple is on active mission with Jesus. Remember who the disciples were. The disciples were a bunch of spiritually blind men who were healed by Jesus. That's who they were. None of them were perfect. In fact, at this point, I would say they're really unperfect. And the thing is, the more that we look at ourselves as disciples, the temptation is there that we can get together and say, I wonder why that person is going through that. It's probably because of their sin. I wonder why that child doesn't have enough water. It's probably because his parents wasted it all. That continent wasted it all. I wonder why those people go through that. The mission of Jesus calls us to see what is wrong. But many times the temptation is there that we blind ourselves and talk philosophically about the problems of the world rather than doing anything about it. But men and women in history, and what I believe is many of you, can be called by God and given a holy discontent to see what is wrong and to make it right. Listen. Billy Graham, his eyes were opened. And he said, people need to hear the gospel. People need to hear the good news of Jesus. So it costs them everything. And he goes out and he tells people in little buildings about Jesus. And all of a sudden, those little buildings, people get attracted to that because of the amazing, simple, clear and simple message he's sharing. And God moves, and thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people come. And lives are changed. Possibly someone in here has been affected, if not most of us, by the work and ministry of Billy Graham. Martin Luther King Jr., his eyes were open, and he understands that, wait a minute, it is wrong, it is not right, it is wrong that black people and white people and people of all races are separated. And so he says, no segregation. That is wrong, and he gives his life fighting for that cause. God-induced vision that is clear and simple, and it costs him. In recent news, Bono, the rock star, U2, it's a beautiful day. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. He has said, listen, people are starving all across the world. People are starving. And it's not good enough to say that's their problem anymore. So he goes out and he says, listen, England, listen, Ireland, listen, the United States, listen, rich people all across the world. People are starving and we have to do something about it. Open your eyes. God can use anyone who has a holy discontent. When we really believe that he is an active mission, that he has a task for you and a task for me to do and to accomplish. In more of a themed example, Thomas Cahill. I just found this a few days ago. I was like, oh, that's great. Thomas Cahill, who wrote a book about the Irish and how they saved civilization. He wrote of St. Patrick. He said, the papacy did not condemn slavery as immoral until the end of the 19th century. But here is Patrick, St. Patrick, in the 5th century, seeing it for what it is. I think that shows enormous insight and courage and a tremendous fellow feeling. Now let's listen to what he says. He says, the ability to suffer with other people and to understand what other people's suffering is like. You know what he was saying? St. Patrick had what Jesus had and what all of his disciples are called to do. Empathy. Open your eyes. A God-given holy discontent. This is what Jesus was here for. Jesus saw a problem. God gave him a task. You see, the bigger task, besides the people hurting, besides the people blind and sick, the task was, you know what? Mankind, all of man, all women, they are separated from God through sin. That is not right. That is wrong. So Jesus says, I'm going to give my life for all mankind. I'm going to pay the price, a beating, a ridiculous group of ceremonies that will ultimately put me on a cross that I do not deserve. But I'm going to take it for Marty Holman. I want us to ask this question as we finish up this morning. I'll ask this question. What is wrong? What's wrong? What is so wrong that we have shut our eyes, whether at work or at school or with our friends? Something that is wrong that God has given us the ability to change. I don't know what it is. In your world, it's probably different than my world. Maybe it interlaps at times. What is wrong?